Sure. Well, what a wonderful morning it is. Good morning to you all today. It's an absolute pleasure for me to be here, invited on behalf of Think Healthy Me to be chairing this meeting today, entitled Social Prescribing Awareness. My name is Amrita, and I am a portfolio GP, which essentially means that I practice clinical medicine. I am a working GP, but I'm also somebody who has a few different other hats as well. So I am a wellbeing expert and a positive psychology practitioner and coach. So it's wonderful that we've all taken time this morning, I think, to celebrate Social Prescribing Awareness Day. And this is the fourth time that this event has been celebrated in the UK. And I think it's such an amazing opportunity for us to come together and be part of one community, recognising the strengths of such interventions and the opportunity for us to actually pay our respect and recognise the honour that it is to work in such a community and have the community referrals process. So we have a bit of a journey today, and I'm going to be introducing Chiara and Isabel. Then I'll be talking a little bit about social prescribing from a general practitioner's point of view, and then we'll be talking about how we seek solutions around social prescribing, offering examples of the provisions of healthcare that have been available in communities that allow people to grow, thrive and flourish from the support that's offered to them. We'll then be moving on to explaining what the forerunners are in terms of what the community is offering currently, and then recognising the national and personal dilemma around difficulties. Sorry, I've done that back to front, haven't I? But I'm sure you're aware of the flow chart that Brian has very nicely put together. Then we'll be moving on to understanding local access provision, and then the choices that are available in East Kent. And this is going to be expertly delivered by our colleague in the room, Isabel Mead and Ciara Jean Roberts. So just a bit of a background about Ciara. Ciara has vast experience. She trained as a pharmacy technician and also in radiology as well. And she has a young family who she is keen on looking after and helping support her local community. She grew up in a family of nurses and was very often helping her father within a cottage hospital, which is really where I imagine her support of the community really started to build very organically, and that's currently seen in her work today. We are absolutely lucky to have Isabel discussing her experiences today and understanding how she works to support the independent sector as well as the services offered by the NHS. Isabel is passionate about natural environments and healthy food, and she's going to be offering her expert skills today on how these can actually support mental health and physical health benefits, as well as looking at garden designs and how nature can really help people in the context of their well-being and how it can support people to have more fruitful lives. Ciara is a yoga facilitator. She's a nutritional therapist, and she's been pioneering a way in which we're able to recognise the holistic benefits of healthcare and medicine and how we can look at the person as a whole. She's founded an organisation called the Wholly Aligned, which is essentially where she's able to really use her expertise in supporting people, dedicating her life to help others and those that she works with awaken their physical sense and recognise how they might be able to heal themselves from within. So without further ado, I would like to hand over to Isabel and Ciara for their opportunity of learning about social prescribing from their perspective. Following that, I will give a brief overview of social prescribing from a general practitioner's point of view and what my experiences of that have been.
Okay, so I'm just hoping that you can see what I can see at the moment. This is not my strength, this bit. We did rehearse it the other day and I've lost that tab now. So sorry to keep you waiting for just a moment.
It looks perfect.
Not from where I'm sitting.
No, okay.
I'm just trying to minimize all of you. Sorry, not my strength this bit. There we go. Right. Okay. So odd to start off with the Orient Express, but that was for when you were waiting in the waiting room, but we changed it. And the idea is being on a journey, and we only want the best for you. And of course, the menu there is all healthy living. So moving on, we've had the introduction. So I'm just going to skip through that. Social Prescribing Day. There was going to be a video. And we'll just get to our objectives now. Okay, so this is where I want to be really. So I'm hoping that you will learn something new out of this presentation. My cookery and food and nutrition skills are not going to be presented though. So perhaps we'll save that for another day. I'm sure we have much more capable experts on the panel here as well amongst our associates who do actually specialise in those areas. So currently, actually, I'm working in women's health in governance, dealing with complaint handling, but I also have an editing business on the side. As far as the healthy stuff goes, I do some garden design and gardening for people, some commissions and stuff, and I'm very interested in permaculture. So that's where that whole food and nutrition and environment thing is starting to take shape. And in fact, I'm very excited because I've just been invited to share in an allotment, a new allotment, with a couple of enthusiasts who are also interested in permaculture. So let's check in on that in a couple of years' time and see how healthy I'm looking from all the wonderful organic vegetables. So we'll learn something new, but not cookery. I'm hoping that you'll take something away that you will use and find beneficial. So too often we sit through presentations and possibly we enjoy it, we hope, and you think that's interesting, but do we really put those things into practice? And so that's what I'd like you to do after this, just give it a little bit of thought and then go and see your GP or go and see somebody in a group, but we'll come back to that later. But there is so much benefit available to you through social prescription and through other people. So I'm hoping that you'll all become evangelists and start talking to people about it. So then finally, that you'll be informed, like I say, to talk to other people about social prescribing. You don't need to be an expert. My apologies, Anne-Marie, for correcting you. I'm not an expert. I just got very excited about the Community Renewal Fund when I found out more about it last year. Did quite a lot of research about that, and that's become the Levelling Up Fund. It's all to do with that. And through that found out about social prescription. So I shared that with the board, and then we thought, yes, this is it. We're all talking the same language. So I've done some research on it, but I'm not actively involved at the moment. But that said, we're in contact with people who are, and I'm hoping that a couple of them will be along today. They had said they'd come. Haven't seen them yet, but it's very dynamic and it's growing. It's an organic thing. Even Public Health England have described it as organic. I know it's one of those popular words, but we all need to be part of that growth. And I'll come back to that later. So, which leads me on to wondering, what are you hoping to hear today? Because when we turn up to these things, we always look for something. And so you might just want to know how it works. But I think really what most people want to know is, how will this benefit me? How can I possibly receive the care that I need in the future? Because we are looking at all the news. News is never really good or rarely good that we see on the television about the NHS. And as somebody who works in complaints, I really know about that. But we are concerned because we see that the population is increasing. We hear about that, and the indices for deprivation. So that's how the numbers of people who are in great need, and this is particularly relevant in Thanet and a lot of coastal towns, in fact, how great need impacts on health. So we have an increasing population with an increasing lifespan because healthcare is good. The way we live is better. And so there are so many reasons why we have increasing lifespans. Unfortunately, that goes hand in hand very often with age-related health problems, and they can last for decades. So when I was a child, if somebody lived into their mid-70s, you'd often hear them say, "Oh, they had a good innings, they did well. That was, they had a good long life at 73. Now, 73 is like, oh, that's young, because we're expecting people to go into their 80s, 90s, and even to 100, because care is so good, despite everything that's said. And then that brings us to the health implications involved with that. Lifespan is not the same thing as a health span. It might sound great. He lived until he was 90. She lived until she was 96. But if you spent the last 20 or 30 years in poor health or very isolated and depressed, then perhaps that last significant chunk of your life isn't really so great after all. And there are projects and great bodies of work going into making the last days of our life count. So I think that there's a very well-known one in the NHS called, I think it's Last 1,000 Days, and that connects to a project about pajamas, getting people out of their pajamas, because the very act of just getting up, getting changed, and at the end of the day, getting undressed when going to bed involves movement. And a lot of people skip that in hospital, and then it knocks off days or even longer of their lives. So simple things can have massive impact on our lives. So health span is something that we're particularly passionate about at Think Healthy Me, in different ways for different reasons, but we're all committed to the same thing: healthier, happier lives. And so social prescribing really meets that need. So the next challenge area is decreasing resources. So you've got this increasing population, but the resourcing is coming down. Budgets are very hard to push for, to get increased budget. There just isn't enough to go around, it seems, with more and more pressure on services. And the other thing is recruitment, because taking women's health, which is the area that I work in, as an example, this has been really badly hit by resourcing issues. So staffing and budget and space, actually. We've outgrown the spaces. If you want to have a baby in a room, that's fine, but there probably isn't going to be room for a resuscitator. So it's going to fail the CQC check for that particular room. There are massive issues, and it puts staff under stress. So there's been a big report lately called in the last couple of years, called the Kirkup report, which was put on, it's been broadly covered in the media, inviting women and families to come back and complain about services they've experienced more recently, but in the past. So it's very distressing even to read of those complaints. And I have to say, hats off to my NHS colleagues. They are just the most remarkable, humble people I could imagine. I've sat in front of a panel of consultants who say to me, okay, Izzy, what have we got? What do you want us to do? And then we'll look at each case and they'll say, that poor woman, can you imagine how she felt? That's their attitude. It's not one of how dare she complain, it's how can we make this better now and going forward. But we shouldn't have to be mopping up mess all the time. And the trouble is, we can't get the staff, we can't get the doctors, we can't get the midwives, because there's always a natural wastage where you have people retiring or going off, perhaps have babies. So I think we've got 3 midwives on maternity leave at the moment. But we can't recruit them either, because there's a national shortage of midwives. COVID had an impact on the student midwife population qualifying. And then those who are around look at all the challenges here in the NHS, and in Kent generally, it's expensive. And the NHS isn't very good, and the education is not very good, and local authority is not very good. Where's the motivation to come and move down here? So we have this decreasing resources, particularly involving recruitment as well. So that leaves us with a problem, a big problem. How are we going to make it work going forward? And so obviously a lot of thought has gone into this, research, and so we have to think about how we're going to breach the gap. I can't say the word breach anymore without thinking about babies, but anyway, breach the gap. So we have to do something about it. We need to find a route to a solution. Maybe that involves reframing it, looking at it differently, review the problem. The Stoics, group of philosophers, used to say that very often the problem is the solution. And they believed that, and actually often it's the case. So we have to mind the gap. We need to look at this differerently. And how are we going to do that? Hargate Daning. There you go. No, it's not Latin. That's just actually looking at it backwards. So going back to the analogy of the tube station there, when you're looking at that sign, mind the gap, there's a problem in front of you. You're going into the train, aren't you? And there's so you're being cautious there. But as the people coming out, if you turn it around, the people coming out and going onto the platform, they're also having to be cautious. They're seeing a different view. So we need to see this from the other person's point of view and how we can address that. So going back to this problem of challenge, and in fact, actually looking at challenge, I just thought, oh, I wonder what the description is for that. Dispute, I like that. Especially as being unjust. Yes, we complain about the NHS and the postcode lottery and so on. Outmoded, how often do we hear that the NHS is no longer fit for service? And how much data are we getting through that challenges old assumptions? So it's actually very relevant. And then next, to confront or defy boldly, to dare. And this is to break out of the mold. So there's a lot of daring going on in the NHS. I see it from within, as I'm sure does Amrita and probably other colleagues too. To do things differently, you have to break out. And it's difficult because you're working within a very structured system, but actually that system needs to change. And so that's where we're challenging the narrative, how we talk about things, because we have a lot of expectation as consumers of healthcare that we should be cared for, and particularly in certain economic groups, people should be looking after us. But we really need to become more autonomous. We have to take more self-responsibility. How often have you seen somebody perhaps who's clearly not very well or not living a healthy lifestyle and then complaining about being unwell when you can see it's the lifestyle or habits that are very likely the reason for that? But it's hard to break habits alone. We need support. And so GPs, they're just overwhelmed, for instance, with another problem, which is loneliness. 1 in 5 consultations relate to social issues. So here we go. We have our NHS not doing well, our health not doing well, population on the increase. So, looking at that, it makes sense that we have to make use of what we have, which is, frankly, each other. And so the challenge there is, how are we going to go about doing that? So, and in fact, the increasing population then becomes not a challenge, but our solution. So how are we going to harness that? Because it can really make such a difference. I don't know, my scribe, I've gone round on the loop there for some reason. Anyway, so we are the power in the community. And in fact, we hear a lot about community spark plugs in our little bubble here. And it's those spark plugs who really make a difference to others. And we will see a video shortly that demonstrates that. And so there we go. Pow. That's about the impact we can have. And that's working together. So I'm going to pause the sort of business end like of it, if you like, and then switch into a more personal mode, which is not something I want to do too often. There you go. So this pair of urchins in the photo, that's myself and my sister. I'm on the left. So our story is that when my mother, well, I'll backtrack a bit. My mother was a New Zealander, and so she grew up in the 30s. I can't remember the date, but she grew up in the 30s in an extremely rural part of New Zealand as a farming family, and they had next to no exposure to the sorts of germs and bacteria that normally thrive in built-up areas. And at age 19, she went off to become a nurse, her mother having previously been a community midwife, but in a different format that we know today, and my great-grandmother too. So she went off to the nearest city, which is about the size of St Nicholas at Wade, and so not a city at all, to a hospital to learn nursing, where she promptly picked up 3 of the major childhood diseases, and that severely weakened her heart, because as an adult it does that. So she lived for the next few decades with heart disease, and then in her late 30s met my father, and they decided to have a family. I'll spare you the story around that. But the point of that was, in the 70s, early 70s, to have children when you're in your late 30s with a considerably weakened heart was not a very wise idea. And so subsequently, after I was born, she was fairly well bedridden because her health was so reduced. And then they had my sister 15 months later, by which time her heart had just all about packed up. And in fact, we lived in Watford, well, outside Watford. Some of you might be old enough to remember the Leavesden studios, the films where Carry On films were filmed there. That's the area, that was our sort of village. And we had a cottage hospital there for the elderly, which I'll come back to in a moment. But nearby was Hemel Hempstead Hospital, Harefield Hospital. And she was one of the first patients to have a heart transplant, which was pioneering surgery at that time. That extended her life for a bit. But if you look at the family situation, my dad needed to work full time, needed help looking after her, and had 2 young children that he couldn't look after because he was quite isolated. And this is where the community stepped in. So we were parishioners in the local Catholic church nearby in the village, and a number of the nurses were also in the church as well, and friends, because it's a small village community. So they cooked up an arrangement between themselves, whereby if Dad was on night shifts, then one of the other nurses who was also on night shift, when they came off shift together, she would come around and collect myself and my sister, who would have been prepared by my mother, so she would have got us dressed. I don't actually remember that bit. I do remember the fun going off to her house, where we'd have breakfast and play with her children before she took us to school for the day. And then she would pick us up after school with her children, give us tea, we'd play, have lots of fun, go home tired and happy, and go to bed and do the same thing in reverse the next day. And that's how they worked it. And that was if we were at home at all. When Mum was really, really ill, then we had family in the East End of London who later moved to Herne Bay, who would step in and look after us. We were virtually adopted, so we might be there for weeks at a time. And at that point, they had little space. It was a 1-bedroom flat, I think. And so they had a cot. I think there was a bed for the 2 older girls who were a little bit older than me. I probably bunked in with them as well. And then they had a baby who was the same age as my little sister. So 1 went in the cot, or maybe 2 went in the cot. And then my little sister was in a drawer on the kitchen table, to which one of my older cousins said, "Mummy, you can't possibly do that. That's not safe." Well, in those days, everybody knew it's one of the safest things you could do. Just put them in a box somewhere steady and they'll be fine. So we grew up with other people being looked after by our community because our own family couldn't do that for us. And in fact, I have no doubt that's the 2 of us with Mum. That's my sister in front and me cheekily poking my head out behind. I've no doubt that it's those days that heavily influenced what we then went on to do. For some reason, it's not showing the rest of the photos. That's a shame. So this is my father in the middle, my sister on the right there, and me here. So that's Paula. So Paula then went into, so my mother was a midwife and a mental health nurse into general health nursing, adult nursing. My father was in adult health nursing and mental health nursing. My sister went on to become a nurse. I was a pharmacy technician for a number of years, then went into radiography for a bit before having a family with 4 children who are also very socially orientated now that they're growing up. So that's my little story. Sorry, it went on a bit about community. And in fact, if you look at community, I'm always interested in words. That bit in the middle means munis, and that just denotes a mutual exchange of benefit. Sometimes that's not always clear, but it's generally there because when we give, we receive. And sometimes that's really obvious. So I always think that's an encouraging thing to think about. And looking into a bigger scale of community power, you had, for instance, the government outsourced test and trace program, which really didn't work. But that said, it worked when they engaged local public health teams with community to get behind things. Then things really stepped up and they managed to to make the whole system work much more effectively. This is from Public Health England. You can read, so I don't really need to talk you through that. But it just demonstrates how the system can address health inequalities through social contact. So, oh, sorry about the WhatsApp there. So I've lost my train of thought now. So, for instance, we know that, in fact, isolation or domestic abuse, things that you don't see in the home, can actually have a huge impact on mental health and physical health. So if somebody comes to a GP, and I'm sure Anne-Rita, you'll be able to confirm this, and says, I've got, I'm not feeling well, and it's clear then after a time that there's a problem with blood pressure. This patient's got high blood pressure, they're talking about anxiety, and then the patient, the GP, who of course only has a few minutes to listen, discovers that actually this person is suffering from anxiety, and as a result of that, they eventually lost their job, they've become redundant, it's long-term unemployed, they've got housing issues now, they've got all these problems around that, which is not the GP's job to fix, and couldn't unless they got involved with community. So I'm going to just touch very, very, very briefly on local community networks, because this is very similar. This sort of connects to the whole social prescribing thing. Before I go on to do that, is there anybody who has a question or would just like a break from hearing me talk for a moment? Deadly silence. Good. Okay, that's fine. I'll keep going. So with local community networks, this is something where after Brexit, there's obviously a shortage of funding because we didn't have money coming in, the masses of money coming in from the EU. So the government had to step up and put together the Levelling Up Fund. And communities were able to, and are still tapping into that because they realise that they can use community power to deliver services in conjunction with local authority. So it just seems very quiet, and I'm just concerned that I'm talking so much. So if you're
it's all very interesting, Isabel. Please don't be disheartened. I think you've got everybody's complete attention.
Right, that's fine. So thank you. Sorry?
Listening, thank you. Don't worry.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you very much. So I got very excited, and as did the rest of the board at Think Healthy Me, when we learned about local community networks. So we know that there are networks, unofficial networks, in every community, and in fact, in Ramsgate, we have the highest number of volunteers of anywhere in the country. So there are these unofficial sort of networks in the background where people are getting things done. Either quietly by their own private arrangements, or little groups like the litter picking group in, I can't remember what they're called, is it the Ramsgate Town Team, something like that, who get things done or look after, perhaps give lifts to people who need to get to hospital. There are all sorts of things, at craft, even arts and crafts groups. There's still networks because people talk to each other and people give their time very generously. And so the local community networks harness that, but in a much more recognised and structured way that draws funding, or can do if you choose to go down that route, to then enable those networks to do more, to accomplish more of what they want to do, because they have the systems in place. They just need the resourcing. And so these are growing, and in fact, not unlike Ramsgate, there's a town in the southwest called Ilfracombe, or as they've sort of rebranded themselves, I'll just catch up, sorry, one Ilfracombe. So I've actually spoken through that stuff. Actually, I will mention, you can see it there, community-centred care, and this is from .gov, so this is not me making it up. It's more effective than traditional services in improving the health and well-being of marginalised groups and vulnerable individuals. And the reason for that is because those people very often aren't coming forward. They're unseen, they're unknown. But if a neighbour sees something, they may bring that forward. One of those neighbours who's a bit of a spark plug and gets things done. So, for instance, I was, oh gosh, yes, I mean, I've spoken to a number of people who know elderly people who have cleaning ladies generally, who come in. They don't want them to clean the house. They just want the company, or to run them down to the shops because that's fun. And I've done that as well for old people in the past. A trip to Waitrose was a day out. It was lovely. They had everything they needed, but they just enjoyed being run down to Waitrose. The autonomy of picking up what they like, their favourite treats, probably not very healthy things, but went into the trolley, pushing the trolley themselves, taking the card out and paying for things, because we all like, excuse me, to be independent. And that's a huge part of that, excuse me. But equally, marginalised groups and vulnerable individuals are often masked by their isolation. So this is where community really steps in. And as another example, just a few months after the pandemic broke out, I had to move house. And I moved away from Broadstairs into Canterbury. Very nice area. It's a little, it's a flat in a small cul-de-sac with a number of other flats around. So about 70 households in all. Didn't look like that much, but there were. And when I moved in, somebody said, do you want to join the WhatsApp group? And I thought, oh, that's lovely. Actually, it was much better than I expected, because it turned out that this community years ago, 20 odd years ago, used to be very connected, and then it all sort of drifted and nobody knew each other anymore. And then COVID came along and somebody said, let's have a WhatsApp group so we can check on each other. So a couple of days in, I'm getting WhatsApp messages first thing in the morning, you know, maybe 7:30, good morning. And it's to the whole group, and there's a little blue heart. And then somebody else is sending one with a red heart, and somebody else is sending one with a pink heart. I'm thinking, what is this business with the heart? So I spoke to somebody, lovely lady. She's our community watch there. I've moved away since then, but we're all still in touch. And she has mobility issues, so she parks herself by the window at the front of the house, and people would come and pass by in front of the window, open the window, have a chat, you know, nice and socially distanced. But she would be able to sort of keep track of what was happening and sort of raise the alarm if there was a concern, especially if the traffic wardens were on the way through and somebody was parked in the wrong place because there weren't enough parking permits. Anyway, moving on from the parking permits, I was baffled by these messages with the little hearts on them. So I went to speak to Ruth, and she said, oh, she said, it's a code. So we decided at the beginning of the pandemic, when we did this group, we wanted to look after each other and be aware if somebody was having a bad day. So if it's a blue heart, it means that I'm having a bad day, because there were a few people who suffer acutely from anxiety and depression in the area. If it's a green heart or pink, I can't remember now, I'm having a good day, everything's fine, thanks. And it was just that checking in. And if somebody was having a bad day, then messages of encouragement would come through. Or somebody might say, I need to be able to get some, I don't know, eggs or something, but I can't get to the shops. Does anybody know somebody who's going to be going? And so we had this sort of supportive environment where we provided services and encouragement for each other. Which was phenomenal, as well as just general chit chat, because you couldn't have conversations. So I remember seeing messages like, I've got some spare sourdough starter, because of course everybody started bread making. I've got some spare starter. Would anybody like some? Oh, yes, please. Yes, please. How about kefir? I've just had a go at that, you know. So there's all sorts of interesting stuff happening there. But it broke up people's day. And that isolation is something that is just so confining for people who are stuck within it. And then they become invisible. And that's why community-centred care is so important, because we are the eyes and ears for our neighbours. So that being the case, where are these local community networks? I'm not going to labour the point about the LCNs themselves, because we don't have it in East Kent yet. We're hoping that we will. This is part of the devolution programme, but we have such good community frameworks, in order to avoid using networks as an expression, that are building and getting stronger. It makes sense to harness that power. But there, for instance, there's one Ilfracombe has jumped ahead. They just decided to organise themselves into an unofficial or pseudo semi-official network, and then went ahead and implemented social prescribing, which they'd effectively been doing anyway before social prescribing really became known about. But I was in Somerset last year. They've become devolved and they've gone down the LCN route. Manchester, I think, has them as well, and another of other places. So now we're going off on our branch line. And we finally made it to Ilfracombe. So beautiful. Or rather, one Ilfracombe. And this is what they've decided to call themselves in terms of a project with local authority, local services like the police, fire service, education. They're all in it together, supporting each other and very effectively. And this is what they're working towards: better health, economic prosperity, with a higher quality of living environment for the people of Ilfracombe. Beg your pardon, excuse me, I have to have a drink. Pretty picture, but we have those in Ramsgate too, and the problems that go with them. And I think that's a great tagline: our future, our choice. This is an example of some of the things they do. There's lots, but again, in the middle, that picture's disappeared. It's supposed to be a poster from the fire brigade, who are providing free fire alarm checks and all that sort of thing. We have these things around us, but it's packaging them together and making sure people actually take up these opportunities. The warm room on the left of the screen there, I know that there's a warm room that's been set up in Singleton, just outside Ashford. I think there's one going into Canterbury. I think I heard that there's at least one going into Thanet. So this is for people who are worried about being able to pay their domestic heating bills. So they've turned the thermostat down or off and they want to be warm. So this has been anticipated. And in this case, One Ilfracombe have set up places where they can go that will be warm, that are welcoming. Provision is made for, there'll be internet access, somewhere to go to the loo, somewhere to have something to eat and drink, because it's a welfare issue, keeping everybody warm. So you've got where there's a restaurant or a cafe there, the library, Baptist Church, Salvation Army, and it just shows that whole integration. Over at Singleton, it's the Singleton Village Hall, together with a sort of cafe, a community cafe that's been set up by a group that started in Canterbury, but now they've grown, and this community cafe provides, and again, this is another example of social care in action through community, through somebody's own impetus. So this particular group decided that they wanted to open a cafe that provided social benefit. So they take young people who are in need of work experience, who are on the who are neurodiverse. They might be on the autistic spectrum, they might have delayed development, might have Downs. For whatever reason, it's more difficult for them to access work experience. And so they come into this cafe and they learn how to make a cup of tea, how to clear the decks, how to talk to people, how to do the cash register. And the other benefit isn't just for them, it's for the customers, because in this cafe, they are aware that not everybody can afford, say, £2.80 for a coffee. So there's a menu of suggested prices, and you pay the suggested price unless you feel you can't. So then you pay what you feel you can afford. So this is just that whole thing, and it's warm and it's comfortable. So this cafe is helping Singleton Village Hall set up the warm space. So there's always going to be provision for the needs of those people who are going to be using the service. And Ilfracombe have just done the same thing. That other poster, Back to Your Future, that's to do with the end of the pandemic and getting everybody out of homes, back into schools, which of course parents were delighted with. So, which is exactly where the children needed and wanted to be, probably much to their surprise. So I think at the beginning of the pandemic, we thought, oh, great, but it didn't work out quite that way. And this is a really lovely infographic, if you like, of how social prescription works. So that person in the middle that's bursting with light and joy, hopefully by the time they've been through this, is you, the consumer, the patient. And so there are social prescription menus, they're called, which give you choices of what services you want to take up. And we'll discuss how that works in a moment. But it might be that you're spending too much time indoors. So there's green social prescribing. So that, as you might imagine, that helps you to access services outside. That might be joining parkrun or Tai Chi in a lovely green space, or getting involved with the allotment association or the community coastal walking groups. You've got lots of community groups, obviously the churches and spiritual centres. Volunteering, never enough volunteers. I mean, we need more volunteers everywhere. And so, but equally, if you're receiving, and this comes back to social capital, which we'll hopefully touch on in a bit, people who receive services as a result of volunteers very often go on to become volunteers because they find their life so enriched and changed by their experience. And then that way, they're perpetuating the benefit. You have community social networks. So, for instance, online in Ramsgate, we have, well, everywhere, the Nextdoor app, which is how I found Think Healthy Me, because somebody said, I'm fed up with everybody complaining about Ramsgate. What can we do? Basically, can we get off our bottoms and do something about it ourselves? And I thought, that's an interesting conversation. Sports clubs. So I've suddenly forgotten their name, the leisure centres, the leisure centre in Dover, they're involved in social prescribing. So GP might refer someone to the link worker, social prescribing link worker. They'll look at their needs. There'll be a long conversation about their needs, because you don't want to be rushed when you're talking about your problems. And you can explain, well, I'm having difficulty with this, I'm having difficulty with that. And because their experience, they might say, oh, and that must be impacting on the other. And how do you feel about this? You know, until they get a really good picture of you and they want to help. So you might actually be referred for, where you say, but I'd love to get out and do something sporty, but I'm not really a very sporty sort of person. I'm quite lazy. Well, have you thought about racquetball instead, or ping pong? Ping pong's not too demanding. All right, there might be some Olympic ping pongers out there who would challenge me on that. I think for most of us, ping pong is not going to be considered a challenging activity. Yes, Scrabble.
Isabel, sorry, can I interrupt?
Yep.
When does Kira come in?
Well,
Because we're starting to get short on time.
We are. I haven't heard from her. Oh, she said she's got... Right.
Yeah, she's here.
She's here in the room.
Oh, I couldn't see that. Right,
yeah, I'm here, Isabel. Unfortunately, I only got the link at 11:15. So I'm happy to speak now. Whatever works, let me know.
Yes, absolutely, because this graphic speaks for itself. I'd much rather you jumped in. So before you do, I'll just explain to those who are watching. We've visited Ilfracombe now, but I want to introduce Kira, because she's delivered social prescription in London. So we're moving from Ilfracombe to London, and away you go, Kira. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Isabel, could you come out with the slides just so I can see people? It'll just give us more of a sense of connection, hopefully. That would be amazing. Oh, lovely. So great, yay. It's lovely to see some faces. Here we are in the gallery of rogues, perhaps. So my name's Kira, and I'm a newer East Kent resident. I moved from London after over 2 decades in lovely leafy Crystal Palace to Ramsgate after it called to my soul. Just a little bit about sort of who I am, and then I will absolutely go into the relevancy of the social prescribing and why I'm here today. I'm a yoga teacher and naturopathic nutritional therapist. I'm a writer. For about 10 years, I left the crazy world of banking back in 2012. And yeah, my business is called Wholly Aligned. So really the intention is, what is it to step into alignment that goes way beyond the biomedical model of mainstream medicine, that, you know, our health, as we all know, isn't biological result this, pharmacological intervention that. We have to go beyond the mainstream narrative of this, then that. And so it's very hopeful, whether we call it social prescribing, or whether we call it community engagement. And thank you, Isabel, for a wonderful presentation. And thank you also for sharing, you know, the hearts. I love the hearts from the WhatsApp group, and your mother's heart as well, because these are the times that it's time to come into the wisdom of our heart. And it might sound whimsical, but it's actually harder to live from our hearts, because it asks us to disentangle our fears, our limiting beliefs, the doubts. You know, we all have those moments where we're cornered by self-doubt and anxiety, and that's just part of being human. We don't need to pathologize it to the extent that we do. So these things are nuanced. We are kaleidoscopes. No one is just one thing. No one is their job. No one is their illness. And so where I came in, I hadn't heard of social prescribing before 2019. And then a local choir leader in Crystal Palace, who's also a dear friend, sent me a note saying, we're having this meeting about social prescribing. Do you want to come? And so I did, and it was held in the local vicarage. Father John, who's a very engaging and charismatic character, he wanted the church to be a light in the community. And that is, it's a wonderful, diverse way of looking at it, whether, whatever your religious beliefs are. It's really about the time of coming into our true spirituality. And so I went along, and there were practice managers from GPs, there were GPs, there were fitness experts. And from that, I kind of took on the baton of being the yoga teacher for 2 South London yoga classes that were both held in church halls, because they have lower overheads. So, there is a cost implication to these things, of course. But what it reminds me of is Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh said many years ago, community is the guru of the future. And I think we're really in the space now of our community is the guru of now. And guru is Sanskrit for dispeller of darkness, so we awaken our inner guru to really engage with more light in our lives. And those 2 yoga classes, I've been teaching yoga for over 10 years. I came into the world with a mother who had been practicing yoga for many years before she gave birth to me. So it was kind of in my DNA. And what matters to me is, because there's a lot of social injustices in the yoga industry, we saw true diversity. South London is a rich, diverse community. And we saw that represented in these yoga classes. And it didn't matter age, color, beliefs. It didn't matter. It's about, you have a body, you have a mind, you have a spirit, and we're here to explore that. And again, it's nuanced, it's kaleidoscopic, it's incredibly unique, because no one can know what your unique family constellation is. No one can know what your wounds are. And me, having had my kidneys failed when I was 14, so I've had many years on dialysis. I am now living with a second kidney transplant, which is very joyful. And to me, that really indicates how connected we truly are, that, 2 men died, and I had the benefit of receiving a kidney at different stages in my life. So it's very humbling to have these things. And it does require, and I know that this stuff is hard, because I've had to repeatedly get out of my own way about, what is it to come into these spaces and speak honestly and share from a place of heart. It's not always easy, because, we can have those fears and those doubts and those worries. But it's really when we come into community engagement, where we create these safe harbors to express who we really are and to be heard. We all long for a sense of connection and belonging, and to be seen for who we truly are, not to come in as a representation of what we think we're supposed to be. And especially, I've worked a lot with medics over the years with Wholly Aligned. And guess what? Medics are humans and they have enormous pressures on them. They're also, smart people, and they're constrained by a system that has all kinds of dysfunction in it. The people in it are incredible, but the system has a certain paradigm that's developed over decades. So these aren't easy fixes. So it kind of comes back to what Isabel was saying around being autonomous, to take bone-crushing responsibility for who we are in the world. And what are we eating? How are we sleeping? How are we breathing? Are we having a moment to watch the sunrise? Are we having a moment to look up at the luminosity of a full moon? That's medicine. It's deep soul medicine, and we need more of that. And just in terms of the practicalities of these 2 South London classes, they were funded by the local GP, Parchmore Medical Centre in Croydon, in Thornton Heath, in the borough of Croydon. And I delivered those for nearly 2 years, and then the funding got cut, for various reasons. I think it was more around a little bit of disorganization going on at a council level, which happens. And it was really an opportunity for me to, because it happened right before lockdown, March 2020, and an opportunity for me to, okay, thank goodness I have some email addresses of these people who've been coming regularly. And I offered out an online community class, and that's still going 3 years on. And it's a beautiful thing. So, it's just about, really, we're making this up as we go along. No one person or no one group has all the answers. It's about coming together in spaces like this, sharing our stories so bravely and so honestly as Isabel did. And that, where are the threads? Isabel had that thread of something around nursing, around health, and how that is then, speaking to the woman that she is now. So we actually saw roughly from a statistics perspective, about a 20% reduction in hospital admissions in the local area, not just from the yoga classes. There were other things that were being delivered under that social prescribing umbrella, like mindfulness, counselling, so subsidized counselling, transpersonal counselling that went, deeper into the layers of, it's very complex to be a human, but also to simplify, to amplify. So I'll leave it at that, because I know we're coming up to midday, and maybe if there's any questions or anything, to hand it back to Isabel or Amrita. I'm very happy to take questions as well.
Oh, okay, well, thank you very much. I don't know if Amrita's still here.
No.
No, okay, well, I knew she had to go. I'd like to invite, for a few minutes, anyone to ask any questions to both Kira and Isabel. So if anyone's got any questions, fire away.
I've got one, Brad.
Okay.
Yeah, it was just about the practicalities of finding a way to get involved with these. I mean, there's various organisations, but is there any particular organisation that would be organising social prescribing? Is it the NHS that are organising it? I mean, where is the impulse coming from to make this happen? I mean, I've been looking for ways of getting into connected with social prescribing operations, being in a health giving operation, charity that teaches meditation, and really, I'm keen to get involved, but are there any of these sort of already started in this area? I take it they're not as such.
Chairman, could I attempt to answer Colin?
Yes, go on, Brian.
Yeah, the thrust should be coming from the NHS, and general practice surgeries have a social prescriber who is relieving the doctors by passing on non-medical issues that can be dealt with alternative therapies. Does that help?
I may be able to answer here as well. My name is...
Okay.
Hi, my name is Ruth. I'm the operations manager for Imago. We actually have a large basis of social prescribers across Kent, Medway, and we're just moving into East Sussex as well. So the NHS provides funding to primary care networks, which are groups of GP surgeries that come together to share resources. They have additional funding for additional roles. So that could be mental health nurses, it could be pharmacists, it could be lots of different roles, from clinical to non-clinical roles. And this is where they fund social prescribing. So this is, we have our PCNs who will come to us and say, we've got a real need within our PCN for a mental health social prescriber, or a health coach, or a children and young persons prescriber. So we would then employ them, they would deliver to patients that are registered within those practices. So that's where the kind of funding comes from. It does come from NHS. There are community social prescribers, which tend to be funded by previously by things like KCC funding or small pockets of council funding. But with all of the things going on with KCC and the cutbacks that they're needing to make, a lot of those smaller one-off payments or smaller grants have been withdrawn in order that they can make their kind of savings of about £4 million. So the NHS is the primary funder for any social prescribing, because the aim of social prescribing in its truest form is to reduce the pressures on GP surgeries with non-clinical issues. So the frequent flyers that are going in because their health is affected, but it's affected because of social issues, that's where you need to tackle the root cause as opposed to the kind of symptom of that cause, if that helps answer your question at all.
That I find that very helpful. How about you, Colin?
Well, yeah, except, I tried the NHS and sort of went round in circles and came out again and thought, oh, well, so here I am about two or more years later, started trying to inquire about it during COVID. And of course, it was difficult then anyway, but
Yeah.
since then, I've just sort of put my attention in other areas, but I'd so like to get involved. I started a charity 24 years ago to offer people the ability to connect with nature within themselves. This is the process of transcendental meditation, and I've taught 10,000 people, but in this area, I've not taught that many, and because there are a lot more people who are, because traditionally it's charged for. Around the world, it's a couple of £1,000 to learn and all this sort of nonsense. So we do charge, but I'm very keen to do the really, and we've had projects for helping people who can't afford it and doing free, and I do free teaching where it's necessary. But I'd like to get into a sort of a network that can facilitate this, or know how I would facilitate it myself, other than, by the sound of it, just getting in touch with the NHS, which I've done. And it's, oh, well, you need to talk to this person, and then well, you'll need to talk to somebody else. And in the end, you've gone around in a big circle and come out the door again.
That's what we find as a board. We've been trying to get in touch with GP surgeries in Fanny, and we don't seem to be getting far at all. So
you're going to give them help. And there's no.
They don't want it.
Yeah.
By the looks of it.
They're too busy, I suppose, to even think about it. It's probably not a thing on their agenda.
Okay, well.
I have
a question,
Mr. Chairman.
Okay, I'll come back to you. I'm going to hand over to Caroline first. So, Caroline, over to you.
Oh, hi. I really enjoyed both speakers, and I put a message in. I'm really excited about what you're sharing. And with a program that is data validated and recognised and utilised by Kent Fire and Rescue, for example, worked in prison for 3.5 years with it. I really would love to know who I connect with to have that more in-depth talk about whether or not we can engage with the social subscribing process.
Okay.
Okay. Mental health and it's something very different.
Okay, Isabel, do you have any thoughts?
Yes, and Ruth might be able to help me with this. I think we had Lily here earlier from SEK. Are you still here, but I just can't see you on the screen?
Hiya, yeah, I am. Sorry, I was waiting to kind of step in quickly, but I'm conscious of the time.
Okay, I'll back off because I was going to say I think perhaps SEK would be able to help. So you're the person to talk to on this then.
So I was just going to say, sorry if I'm a bit echoey in here. So we, as an organisation, run a social prescribing service, an enhanced social prescribing service called Connect Well East Kent, and it is funded by KCC, and it's just been extended for another year. So my colleague who oversees the project couldn't be here, so I'm sort of speaking on her behalf, but anyone with any questions is welcome to email me afterwards. I can leave my email in the chat. And we are also been invited to the Kent and Medway Social Prescribing Link Worker Support Programme that the ICB run. And we also are involved in the social prescribing navigation strategy that the ICB are doing. So we do have those connections and those links is the point I'm trying to make. So if you do have any questions on how you maybe wanted to get listed, because you could check our website as well, I'll leave the information. I believe there's ways that you can sign up your service so that the referrers can refer you if someone calls in. So I don't know if anyone had any questions quickly, but I can leave the information and my email in the comments.
That's terrific.
Okay. Thank you. Caroline, does that help you?
Yes, that's very helpful. Thank you very much indeed.
Okay, I'd like to hand over to Brian, who's going to ask the last question. So Brian, over to you.
The presentation made reference to self-management, and the NHS used the term self-care, as do we in our diabetes group. There hadn't been too much reference about self-care, and I wonder if any of the participants, particularly the lady from Margate and the SEK lady, have any views on spreading the word of self-care, because I self-care to stay alive. And it's a good way to go. It's a good way to help your GPs, okay? So any comments on that? And the final thing is, how would the participants feel following Caroline's and Colin's questions about whether after this event we consider creating a social prescribing learning hub or join an existing hub in order to share good practice on social prescribing?
Absolutely.
Okay, well, thank you, Brian. Does anyone have any thoughts about self-care?
Well, I mean, what I teach is entirely teaching people how to be produce self-care in themselves, just by knowing themselves first of all. But it's the heart of yoga. That's what yoga is all about. And I'd love to get involved with a group. You know, if we can do that through Think Healthy Me, all the better.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you for that. Does anyone have any thoughts on the social prescribing community hub that Brian mentioned? Anyone like to be involved?
Brad, Lily, sorry, Ruth had a point she wanted to make.
Yeah, I just wanted to say very quickly, self-care should be at the heart of any kind of social prescribing, where you've got anybody that has health conditions or, you know, we all have physical health, we all have mental health. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. It's self-managing, self-caring, but it is also understanding what the barriers are to providing that self-care, and that's where the social prescribers come in. They can do holistic approaches and assessments. They can look at what the barriers are. They can look to reduce the health inequalities. It could be that somebody has been put into temporary accommodation and can no longer attend GP appointments or their diabetic reviews because they can't afford the travel there. So it's looking at all the options. It's taking it on a real kind of ESTA-centred approach, which is the NHS kind of person-centred approach of they're an individual, they have individual needs, and we need to look at it on a case-by-case basis, not lump people into one generic kind of, well, this group of people are going to have problems because of this. It is providing that very person-centred, person-led approach to their own care as well. Okay, well, thank you very, very much for that. I'm concerned about the time. It's now 12:06. So I'm going to have to say thank you very much to everyone for attending. It seems like we've had some very good discussions. I'd like to say thank you to Kira and Isabel for their thought-provoking presentations, and thank you all very much for attending. One final point I'd like to make is that we will be sending out a little survey just to find out how you
found today. So if you could complete that as soon as, that'd be great. Ryan, did you have anything you wanted to say?
Yes, can we also thank Amrita, who chaired the meeting?
Yeah, even though Amrita's not here, I'd like to thank her as well.
I think it's been a very good discussion with good learning, which we can follow through on.
Yeah, most certainly. If the board could stay behind for 5 minutes for a quick chat, that'd be good. And everyone else, thank you very much. And enjoy the rest of your day. Enjoy Social Prescribing Day.
Thanks, Brian.